Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased to have Avlyn Kotton as my guest today. Avlyn Kotton, MA and BCET, is the director of the Kotton Educational Therapy Center. She is a board-certified educational therapist with a private practice in Brentwood and Malibu, California. Avlyn has 30 years of experience working with both private and public school students from kindergarten to high school who have learning differences including dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, executive functioning deficits, and other learning differences. Avlyn has been an active member of the Association of Educational Therapists and has presented at national conferences on identification of learning disabilities and assistive technology skills. She supports collaborating as a part of a multidisciplinary team with classroom teachers, learning specialists, support professionals, and parents to help ensure that the needs of a student are being addressed and necessary accommodations are being implemented. Welcome, Avlyn, and thank you so much for joining me today to share some very important information.
Hi, Gilda. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking with you about my experience and hope that this will help some of your listeners.
Well, thank you. Now, to begin, you are very familiar with various types of assistive technology that is available. How can it be most successfully used for students with learning differences?
Well, let me just say that before the pandemic started, I've been doing this for 25 years. And when it first started, some of the programs that they used differentiated a learning disabled kid from regular students in the classroom. But with the more frequent use of assistive technology and programs like word processors with voice activation, regular kids in the classroom are using this. And with the switch over to virtual learning this past year, I saw such a tremendous improvement, which probably is one of the positive things about the pandemic, that kids as young as second grade, third grade, learned how to navigate many of the websites and tools and take screenshots and send in their work, which probably wouldn't have happened until middle school. But there are, of course, it depends on the specific type of learning disability that a student has. And, if their difficulties are more in the area of reading and dyslexia, then you would gear the programs to reading tools, programs that would read the text to the student, or where they could annotate and extract notes, using audio books. If the problems are more visual motor, then you would use different types of programs to assist the students where they could do text to speech and, use these programs to sort of help accommodations for the difficulties that they might have at home and in the classroom.
All right, so what are some of the warning signs or red flags that educators, parents can look for to identify certain learning differences?
Well, the first thing is sometimes parents will identify it as early as, 6 months to a year, but usually the first indications, unless it's a very severe learning difference, it's the teachers in preschool and kindergarten who will begin to identify that the kids are not learning at the same rate as some of their peers. Sometimes it'll be a pediatrician who will notice certain issues going on with the kid, of course, depending on what the type of difficulty is. If it's attentional, they'll be distracted and won't be focusing in the classroom. But, an astute pediatrician will ask the parent the right kinds of questions. It's unusual for a student to get a full neuropsych evaluation before first or second grade, because sometimes some of these issues are developmental, and you want to give the kid the benefit of a doubt that, different kids learn at different rates. But usually, if they're still having these kind of difficulties by the end of first grade, going into second grade, it is, a good idea to have some kind of assessment done, almost like a red flag warning sign, because my experience has shown me that early intervention is the most critical factor when you're working with kids who have learning differences. I can't tell you how many times I have gotten a new referral of a student who's in 7th grade. And when I assess them for their reading skills, this kid is 3 or 4 years below this level that they should be. And when that happens, going back and, intervening and teaching them some of the basic reading skills and strategies is virtually impossible, because by that time, the kid is astute enough to know that they're not working at the same level as their peers, and they've learned different types of strategies to avoid learning, or act as the class clown so that nobody realizes that they really are struggling with the learning, and they lose motivation. They are not interested in reading, and it's much, much more difficult to remediate at a later stage. So the earlier you can get intervention, the more successful the prognosis is.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
And it is very unfortunate of the number of these students who do kind of slip through the cracks.
Right.
So can you be a little more specific about the different types of learning differences that these younger students will exhibit?
Yes. Of course, it depends on the specific age, but the red flags to look for in preschool kids and kindergarteners will depend on the type of learning issue that they have. But basically, those students with language deficits will be late talkers. They might not be able to, they might have articulation issues, but that's usually not the primary issue. But they might have limited vocabulary growth. They're not picking up words from their environment and aren't able to use the vocabulary in sentences. One of the signs of dyslexia is that the kids cannot rhyme when they're younger and don't seem to memorize nursery rhymes and little poems that they hear. For the reading difficulties that are signs that there might be problems ahead, they might have difficulty learning the alphabet, reciting the alphabet song. And then in kindergarten and first grade, they might have trouble learning the sound-symbol relationships and with phonological awareness. They have very slow processing speed and naming speed. They don't show any interest in reading. They might not even enjoy having parents read to them, although many students who are dyslexic love reading and will listen for hours and can often remember the stories. But if they were reading it themselves, they would lose the content and the meaning, because they're struggling so much about decoding each individual word and each individual sound. Interestingly, with students who are dyslexic or have reading disorders, often once they have actually learned to break the code and decode, at a later stage in the upper elementary school and middle and high school, they will still have trouble with reading pace and fluency. even though they actually have learned how to decode. And what I recommend for the older kids is to listen to books on tape and actually read the book while they're listening to it and be active readers. I always suggest that the students use different color highlighters. So while they're listening to it and reading it, they can color code, like all the new vocab words could be green and new characters could be pink. And that way they stay actively engaged with what they're reading. And sometimes I'll even get them to take a Post-it note at the end of the chapter and just do a few different Post-its of what they've read so that I can ascertain if they have understood it, and also so that they can go back and remember what they've read. Students who have motor skill difficulties right from the beginning will have trouble with their gross motor milestones. They will start crawling late, they'll sit late, they'll walk late, they'll have trouble with skipping and running. When they start school, they'll have trouble with their fine motor skills. They won't hold the pencil correctly. They don't form the letters correctly. And their handwriting might be illegible. Spelling is often off, and this might be something that even with intervention sticks with them even in their high school and middle school years. And you need to teach them how to use spell checks and how to go back a few times and just double check if they're copying, that they've copied correctly and haven't, left letters out, because some of them will just rush through it. And if they know that they have difficulties, then it's even more important just to give them strategies to try and help themselves if they are spelling the same word 5 times in a different way. Those kids who have difficulty with cognition might have difficulty memorizing basic facts. They would be, often easily frustrated, poor sleep habits. If they've got attention difficulties, and sometimes, they might have an attention deficit combined with dyslexia, and there's a huge comorbidity rate with students who have learning differences for depression and dyslexia and other kind of learning differences. And sometimes it's very hard to tell which came first. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg thing. Did these learning differences cause the kid to be depressed and irritable, or was it the irritability combined with, the learning difference that gave, the kid these kind of difficulties? Some of these signs of an attention deficit early on would be, impulsivity, hyperactivity, disorganization, losing things, not being able to follow directions, difficulty with a change in a routine or any kind of changes in their lives. Parents gone on long trips and those type of things. So those are the types of things to look for early on. And I cannot stress hardly enough the importance of the teachers being aware of these differences and bringing it to the attention of the parents. In the public school setting, the parent can apply for an IEP and make sure that the student will be getting the resources and what they need. In some of the private schools where they have a learning specialist at the school, usually the teachers will bring the child to the attention of the learning specialist, who can evaluate them and watch them in the classroom and give suggestions. At one part of my practice, I worked for 15 years as a learning specialist in a private day school. And we routinely used to evaluate the kindergartners just to see if they were, vulnerable or if they needed to be watched in the first couple of years of school. And that way, we would make sure that they were getting the right interventions. And, if you meet with the parents and tell them what you're seeing, often the parents will be in denial. And they'll say, oh, it's just the teacher, or it's a bad school, or, you don't know what you're talking about. But if the parents keep hearing the same thing year after year, usually by fourth or fifth grade, they will say, well, maybe there is something going on here, and they will be willing to try, the recommendations and interventions that the school and staff are suggesting. I have a lot of difficulty when I hear that a kid was in the public school and the parent was telling the teachers, right from the beginning that they were concerned and that there were things that weren't right in the way that the kid was learning and doing their homework and keeping up with the rest of the class. And the teachers would say, and I've heard this so many times, don't worry, they're doing fine, and they're right in the middle of the class. And then a couple of years later, maybe they change schools, or a teacher who's more experienced in identifying, learning differences would bring it to the attention of the parents. And they were right to be concerned and to, be the best advocate for their kids, because sometimes parents have, an intuition, especially when they see students who are soaring ahead, or they go to back to school and those type of things. Difficulties with written expression, known as dysgraphia, can, really hold back a kid, especially when they get to third or fourth grade, where they cannot, take written tests, they can't express themselves. And I strongly recommend that the teachers make accommodations and give them like extra time on the test. Sometimes they will even dictate a social studies test, and the teacher will grade them on the content rather than the fact that they only were able to write a half a page and not answer all the questions. Using a word processor, especially with spell check and where you can dictate into the word processor, has been an absolute godsend for students with learning differences. It can make or break them. And once they become proficient with it, it's a game changer. Students with math difficulties, known as dyscalculia, many dyslexics also have difficulties with math and will have trouble lining the problems up, might add instead of subtract, may only do part of the problem. And what I recommend is, that you give the student accommodations for the math as well. Allow them to use a calculator, whether they use the calculator in the beginning just to see what the answer should be, and then go back and do all the different steps. Or some kids feel more comfortable, doing the steps, getting an answer, and then checking themselves on the calculator. And you can get talking calculators, which are, very helpful as well. But I went to do an in-service at a school a year and a half ago. It was a private Catholic school. And I made this suggestion to the teachers. And one of the teachers said to me, but if we gave them a calculator, that would be cheating, because we would never know whether they knew the concept or not. And it was really hard to explain and to, have them actually understand what the child is going through, and how just giving that tool would help them and, not turn them off math completely. So you have to be very astute with those things. Another type of learning difference that some students have is a nonverbal learning difficulty. And these are the kids who'll be really good at language. They'll have strong reading skills very often, but they have poor visual spatial skills, and they have a lot of difficulty with nonverbal cues. Like they might say something to someone, and the person will be like shocked that they could have said that, or be turned off by it. And yet they'll go on and on and on and not even pick up that they've offended the person or that they've bored the person. This type of child might have difficulty understanding puns and figurative language. And, these skills need to be specifically taught through social skills group or specific types of programs where you make them more aware and you help them to do these mock sort of telephone conversations. Like if you wanted to call a friend and invite them over, this is what you would do. And then another area that's had a lot of interest of late is executive functioning deficits. And there are a couple of people in the field like George McCloskey and Thomas Brown who have been, very interested in understanding how executive deficits relate to different types of learning differences, especially ADHD.
That was actually going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Specifically about executive functioning, because we've all heard the term.
Right.
But can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what that means and what some of the strategies are to help students with that type of difficulty?
Absolutely. Executive functioning skills differ from student to student. But overall, the difficulty that the student will have with self-regulating skills for everyday activities. Thomas Brown describes this as
You're a popular woman,
as the conductor that controls all the different types of executive functioning skills. And he has a list of 6 different skills that are involved in executive functioning. The first one is activation, which is organizing tasks, time management, prioritization. The second skill is focus, being able to sustain attention, especially when it's not meaningful. Because, parents will come in and say, oh, my kid can spend 8 hours building Lego or can watch TV for 6 hours. It's because those are the skills that they want to be doing and are interesting to them. But when they need to do that at school and it's required of them, it's just not meaningful and they cannot modulate and sustain their attention. The third area is effort, regulating alertness, slow processing. They might do fine if there's a shorter assignment for school where they just have to read a passage and answer questions, but might have a difficulty with the longer term assignments where they have to manage their time and pace it and, do an outline and then make sure that they've done their rough draft at a certain time so that they don't leave, the final assignment to the last night when the printer breaks down and then they hand it in late. So, some things that seem like natural to a very organized person might just cause chaos for a kid who has executive functioning deficits. The fourth area is emotion, how to manage frustration. And if their focus is disrupted, then it's extremely difficult to do anything else because they're just thinking about something that has upset them. And Dr. Brown talks about like having a virus on a computer. where until you get rid of that virus, you can't do the other things that you need to do in order to stay calm. And you also need to have strategies when you start getting anxious and disorganized and panicking, to calm yourself down so that you can, just go methodically step by step. The fourth area is memory. They can't access information when they need it, or the right type of information. And that might cause them to be frustrated. And this would be particularly relevant for a kid who's taking a standardized test and knows that they only have 30 minutes to answer, 50 questions. And they see that they're running out of time and start to panic, and then they've lost it and can't even answer the questions that they would have been able to do. And then the last section is action, like, knowing how to regulate your pace. Some kids just rush through it and are so proud that they were the first person to finish in the class. And others just are oblivious to the time, and the teacher will say, put your pencils down, or time's up, or something like that, and they're only halfway through a test. So, making a student aware of their learning style and, teaching metacognitive strategies is really important with kids who have these learning differences. And another thing, especially when the student starts to get older, is that you need to make students advocates for themselves once they understand what their learning issues are. In the early years, it's usually the parents who are going to the school administration, or, the special ed teacher or learning specialist at the school, and saying, this is what's going on. But once the child understands themselves, and in middle and high school, they have to be advocates, and they have to know that if I need extra time, I need to ask the teacher, or if I'm not understanding something at school, I need to go to the teacher during office hours, and that type of thing. And some students don't want to do that. They don't want to be perceived as different to the others. They don't want their kids to know that they're in a special class or being pulled out for certain, interventions. But you have to teach them the right way of doing it. And I guess the teachers themselves have to be more aware of how to interact and how to make a student like that feel comfortable and not embarrass them in front of the class.
Well, it's just so amazing, Avlyn, how many different presentations these types of differences and difficulties can have, mm-hmm. and how denial on a parent's part or ignorance on a teacher's part can have such an enormous impact. So people like you and the service you provide are definitely so important. So tell me, how can a parent find appropriate resources to help their children with these learning differences? And also, how can they reach you if they have questions and if they want to know more?
Okay, let me start with the first part first. There is a lot of awareness of learning differences compared to 30 years ago. So there are a lot of professional organizations that you can turn to. There's the Association of Educational Therapists that I've been a member of for the last 30 years. There's LDA, which is the Learning Disabilities Association. There's an association called CHAD for attention deficits. And then there are special ed schools. Specifically in the Los Angeles area, there are schools like Westmark and Park Century and Frostic in the Pasadena area. There are books and workshops that parents can attend to familiarize themselves of the learning issues. if the student has a difficulty that clearly they need help for, I strongly recommend having a neuropsychological evaluation done, where by a certified professional who can give you recommendations of how to follow up on this, and what steps to take first. Sometimes I've gotten these neuropsych evaluations, and they'll say the child needs speech therapy, OT, vision therapy, and psychotherapy, and the parents are completely overwhelmed. They don't know what to do first, and that, expecting the kid to go every single day after school to, have these interventions is just not realistic. So you have to help them prioritize and say, well, let's try this. This is the most important thing. And then maybe after 6 months, you can try this, and, keep monitoring and evaluating the progress. I would recommend certain programs like Learning Ally, where you can download textbooks and get all your books, even textbooks. You can listen to them, and you can use the library for resources. You can do audiobooks. I would just, strongly recommend that parents try and educate themselves as to what is out there, and if they can't find the help, try and seek it through one of those other organizations. And if you want to reach out to me, my email address is akotton, akotton, @gmail.com. And my website is www.kottonedtherapy.com. And I'd be happy to either, do a consult with you, or refer you to any of the resources that might be the most helpful to you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Avlyn, for your time and for giving us some terrific information today.
You're very welcome. And anytime you need additional help, please feel free to contact me.
Wonderful. Yes, would love to have you back at some point in the future to continue this discussion.
Thank you very much.
I also want to thank our listeners for spending a part of their day with us. I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.